hello. I am so excited to have a beautiful, incredible, very inspiring guest here today. Her name is Naseem. Naseem, thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me. I have
I'm so
so much
excited.
college advice. I was like very excited.
Oh, well, we're excited to have you, and I'm excited to ask you this question too. So, what is Naseem's Campus Chronicles store?
Oh, well, so I was a very insecure young person, probably for like the first 25 years of my life. So there were a few, ridiculous moments, but the one that I think was so helpful for me when I was in college was my sophomore year of college. I was, having this, I went home for the weekend. I was having this breakdown. I'm crying. Like, what am I going to do with my life? Should I change my major? Am I ever going to get a job? Like I don't fit in, like all that kind of, teenage young angst. And my brother said two things to me that were, I think, life changing for me. I know in the same
And
conversation,
from a brother.
I know. My parents actually sent him into my room. They're like, "Oh, we can't deal with her crying. You go try and deal with her."
Now,
And
that's a quality brother. Very few men are good with that sort of thing.
so he came in and I'm, saying to him, like, I just don't feel like I fit in and, stuff like that. And he looks at me and he's like, when are you going to realize that we're misfits? We just don't think like other people. And when you realize that you think differently, life just gets a lot easier. And so, I didn't, automatically change and, and start to, to be like, whoa, I'm a misfit, but it planted the right seed. And then the other thing he said to me in that same conversation, because I said, like, I don't know what I'm going to college for, and am I ever going to get a job? Um, And he goes, all you have to do in college is learn how to think. Just learn how to think and solve problems. That's what you need to do. And I thought, what brilliant advice. Because, the mechanics of so many jobs, you will learn on the job. But if you can develop your mind to think critically and logically, then you can apply that to anything and everything. So,
That is brilliant. I love that. And particularly the second part, although I love both, it is one of those things where as you go through your life, you acquire skills. And in college, one thing that I learned that was tremendously helpful for me was how to trust myself. And of course, I was just like you. I would have the meltdowns, the breakdowns. What am I going to do with my life? Am I going to be successful? Who will I be when I graduate? Those identity crises. But the ability to trust myself and trust that I could handle things was that big turning point for me in university. And speaking of handling things, you have handled a lot of things. I want to talk about it. You have the most incredible story. Let's go to May 21st.
oh, thank you. Well, and first, I have to applaud that you learned that lesson about trusting yourself early on. I didn't, I think, until really, much later in life, and certainly maybe even after this, this big day, May 21st. So everyone, on May 21st, 2018, I was hit and run over by a car 3 times. You know, let you breathe for a second. Yes, I survived.
That's a big thing to casually say, friend.
You know. So the car, actually, it was a beautiful sunny day. I was in the town where I live in New Jersey, in a pedestrian crosswalk, crossing the street to my husband, and a car turned and hit me. The car actually stopped when it hit me, and then it accelerated and drove over me, then reversed over me, and then went forward over me, and I was pinned underneath the car. As you can imagine, it was a pretty traumatic event. It was a life-changing event. And as crazy as this is going to sound, I feel lucky, not only because I have a great cocktail party story now. I was run over,
You
but,
have the number one story. No one can beat you.
but because I learned so much from the journey and the experience. When I was under the car, there were actually, two, I thought I was going to die. And there were two things I thought that I feel lucky to have realized. Well, actually, maybe three. The first was, as I thought I was dying and I didn't want to die, I look back on my life and I thought, yeah, it stinks that I'm going to die, but I've actually had a pretty good life. I mentioned I was insecure for a long time. It took me a long time to be comfortable in my skin, and then a long time to like who I was. And on that day, I had reached a point in my life where I liked who I was. And,
Mm.
I had liked who I was for a while. Candidly, even when I didn't like who I was, I did have fun. Um, and I look back on my life and I thought, I've had fun, I've had good times, I've traveled, I've lived in the present. And I felt good about that. And then I thought, I've had a good life, but I still don't want to leave my kids. They were young at the time. And I thought, who's going to love the kids the way I love them? I've never written them letters. I don't have artifacts for like their weddings and their graduations, where they're going to get my wisdom. And I thought, you know what? I should have written them letters. And then I thought, you know what? It's okay because I was present. We did laugh and we had great vacations and we had great times and danced around the house. And even if I'm not there, they know who I am and they know how I think. And I've left them with a lot of love. I also realized though, is that I did that for my kids, but I didn't do that for the other people in my life that I appreciated, that had made impact. I never, just said, "You are awesome." And I mean, I may have said it, but not enough. I didn't appreciate people as much as they deserved. And I realized that I wanted everyone in my life that made my life better to know that. They deserve to know that. We all need that, and that energy lifts us and drives us and it keeps us going. And so, that was really good learning for me in that moment. But I'll say, look, those things happened, and then, I was pulled from underneath the car, went to the hospital, and I wasn't feeling so enlightened. I I couldn't walk, I couldn't see, I couldn't move. Miraculously, no bones were broken, which makes no sense as the car drove over me 3 times. I had tires go over me 5 times, over my legs, over my chest, over my head and neck. I actually have a picture where you can see the bruises from the tire marks on my neck, which I know I see your face, but I actually call that my favorite accident picture because that was my proof. Like, I'm not making this up. The tires really did go over my head and I did survive.
Oh my goodness. So that was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your story in this space with us. One of the reasons I really wanted to have you on was when you face something like that. So I faced something very, very different than that, but in a moment where I did the same thing. I recollected on my life and I thought about who I had been and how I had lived and was I happy with how I had lived my life. That builds such incredible character. It builds such incredible emotional resilience. But the difficult part about that is that's not a linear journey. When you're going through an adversity, building that resilience doesn't happen building block by building block. Oftentimes you'll have a good day, a bad day. What did building the resilience look like for you?
Yeah, for me, so, as you said, it is not linear. I felt like, some mornings, in the beginning, most mornings I could be thankful that I was alive and I knew that was a miracle. But I didn't resemble myself. Not even my iPhone recognized me. I was really battered and bruised and weak and helpless in many ways. But there are a couple things that happened that helped me navigate. And look, my by my role and by even the advice I gave, learning how to think and problem solve, that's what I did. I was a
Yeah.
problem solver. I was a master juggler of chaos. I was a multitasker, like
Juggler of chaos. That's all of our beautiful university students. Like, I could not think of a more accurate description.
I mastered that, and I was really proud of that. I was someone that did all of that and tried to do it and make it look easy and not ask for help. And I thought that was strength. What I realized though is that by doing that, I wasn't letting people in. And when this accident happened, you know, that was still me. I may have been broken, but I still didn't want to let people in. And then I learned, through an unfortunate incident, my brother lost his dog. And as you could tell from it, the advice he gave me, we're very close. And I wanted to help him, but he was like, help yourself. Don't worry about me. You got run over. And I wanted to help him. And that helped me realize that the accident didn't just happen to me. It happened to everyone that loved me, that counted on me. And, to people that just thought, it could have been me in a crosswalk crossing the street one sunny day. And then all of a sudden, life changes by no fault or action of your own, just wrong place, wrong time. And they all wanted to be a part of my journey. And honestly, I didn't know how to let them at first because it felt like weakness letting them and showing them. But I learned about the art and philosophy of kintsugi, which is taking a broken piece of pottery and putting it back together in a way where you don't hide the seams, but you celebrate them with the gold inlay. And that really, I really internalized that. I actually even put gold glitter on my scars in the beginning, not hiding. Look, I was run over, I can't hide it, and so I put the gold glitter on, but then I also started talking about what was going on, not as a victim, but as this happened as part of my journey. And that change really helped me navigate because I could share where I was, and then I could share my progress. I often give this story, if I showered today, and I know I look like I didn't shower today, but I did shower today.
You totally look like you showered.
If I told you I showered today, you wouldn't be impressed. But if you knew that I couldn't move my arm from the nerve damage, that I couldn't stand, that my body was so raw from road rash and, I was almost like a burn patient that I couldn't stand water. If you didn't know all of those things about my journey, you would say, why are you telling me you could shower? But since you knew all those things, you could celebrate. Oh my gosh, like I walked up the stairs and showered today, and that was huge. And it's so powerful to get to celebrate with people because it lifts them up, it lifts you up. Sometimes it's a proxy for things, they're going through, and maybe they're not seeing the progress they want, but when they see progress in someone else, it helps them believe they're going to move forward too. And
I love this. What you've said about letting people into it convicts me because if we don't let people into what we're actually going through, we don't have the adequate support that we need to build the muscles of resilience, to build the muscles of kindness and empathy. When we go through something hard, it's our initiation to grow, right? To let our hearts grow, to
100%.
let our minds grow, to let our spirits grow. And to your point about a shower doesn't seem like a big deal. I had a very bad stalking incident and I would not go anywhere alone for a very, very long time. But when I finally started to be open about that and be like, I went somewhere by myself today, which going to the bank shouldn't be a big deal, but to me, it was a huge deal. That really helped people to open up where they were as well. And if we want to build a more emotionally resilient world, we have to be honest. And we have to be honest too about where we're struggling
Yeah.
and not really sugarcoat that the way that we do sometimes, because that really prevents that authenticity and that intimacy.
And I love what you said about not trying to, sugarcoat that tough things happen. So we
Mhm.
actually call the anniversary of the accident, we call it Unbreakable Day. and we celebrate the anniversary with usually with a party. And we do two things also. We acknowledge what we've been through. It's not just me, like my whole family, like we were all through, went through something really tough and we navigated it. And, also by calling it Unbreakable Day, we took ownership that it's not the day that I almost died. It's the day I survived. And we're going to celebrate that. And it gives us
Yes.
also an opportunity to thank the people that helped us navigate. And, what I have found is so valuable when I share that is that when you take ownership of the moment, you get to reframe it. It doesn't own you, you own it. And what I didn't know in college and wish I had known is that we do have the power to reframe our stories and shape our stories. We own our narrative. If think about the words that you choose, the way you talk about your days and your moments and your challenges. Are you doing it with words that predict victory or progress? Or are you doing it with words that hold you back? And I know it sounds simple, but just changing your language can change so much. And when it's like treating my wounds and my issues not as though I was a victim, but as this is part of my journey. Just doing that, allowed me to drive a positive energy. And that and we react to the energy around us.
We do. And the things that we go through, whether they're big or they're small, and we're talking to people that maybe, are did not get into the school of their dreams, or people who maybe are going through a tough time academically, personally, relationally, maybe a breakup. These experiences become the fabric of who you are. And from that place, you do build the resilience, but it does not mean, to the point that I made about being linear earlier, it doesn't mean you're going to feel good about it every day.
No,
It
definitely not.
does not mean that you're always going to be positive about it. It means you have to be honest with yourself and find ways to move yourself into a better space when you feel yourself struggling.
Yeah. And I know sometimes it can seem, easier said than done. But as you noted, like when you let people in to help, when you open yourself up, you also realize everybody's going through something. I talked about how I tried to make it look easy as the master juggler and, never asking for help. Somebody said to me after the accident, I was almost so good at that. They said I was an unsympathetic character.
Wow.
And and I'm actually so thrilled that they shared that with me because I didn't realize that I created a distance between people because I was never vulnerable. I never let them in. And once I started letting people in, my relationships got so much stronger. Look, I'll share with your audience. I have a traumatic brain injury. A car ran over my head. I thought, how am I ever going to go back to work and be a problem solver and, do the things that I was always good at and rewarded for with a traumatic brain injury? Remarkably, my career has gotten much, has been more rewarding. I've been more successful because even though I have a traumatic brain injury, I now can open up to people more. And that has built a foundation of trust with people more quickly. And it's actually allowed us to tackle sometimes bigger problems. And that, is a really wonderful, nice surprise. But had I not allowed myself to recognize, look, I can't juggle 10 things, but I can go deeper in one thing, and if I judged myself for that change, I wouldn't have been able to embrace the new me.
It's back to what I said about being honest with yourself. Because what I hear over and over in your story is that even though there were, I'm sure, tough days, right?
Yes.
You
Oh
were
my goodness.
honest with yourself about what you could
Exactly.
do that day, about what you were going through that day, about, as you said, the new you. Mm, I love this. Okay, I have a hard question for you.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I know you can do it. If you had 3 pieces of advice that you were going to give university age students, what are those 3 pieces of advice about navigating setbacks, building resilience, all of this?
Well, the first thing, and I said this already, is know that you own your story. And, stories are never perfect, and they're not linear, but it's still your story. If you don't like the way it's going, think about how you can change it, how you can use your words, what can you do differently? But never feel like the story you're in today is the only story because
Or
there's
that it owns you?
yeah, I think the second thing is, for those sometimes tough moments, when you're, maybe when you're feeling stronger or, even if you're feeling down, sit down and write out your inventory of wins. The moments in your life that you thought, wow, I did that. I feel good. And it could be helping somebody, maybe it was a sports win. Maybe you got an A on a test or in a class that you had previously been failing. It doesn't matter um, where you draw it from, but think about, what are those moments that surprised you, but that you feel proud about, and write those down because that's like money in the bank. When you need to draw on your savings of, I can do this. I have done hard things. I have achieved sometimes what I didn't expect to achieve. You need that inventory of wins. And I think the third thing is, you know, a, try to be present and appreciate the people around you. If you're in a coffee shop and, somebody smiles, look up from your phone and smile back if you can. If they try to talk, you know, respond. People need connection so much, especially now in a world where we've all got digital devices drawing our attention away. Sometimes just being present in a small moment can have such a wonderful positive ripple effect for somebody's day, for the people that, maybe more active in your life, tell them that you're thinking about. Like, send a text to maybe an old friend from high school that you haven't seen, but that, you did enjoy spending time with, and say, you know what, just thought about you today, really enjoyed, our years together. Or, whatever, maybe that's a little corny, but whatever you want to say.
Party is good.
But just appreciate your parents if you can, you can, your siblings, your friends, just be present and take the time to pass on some positive energy, because that energy builds energy.
Mm, energy builds energy. I have a curiosity question.
Sure.
You'll go down the rabbit hole with me, though. So you studied journalism, I studied broadcasting. My curiosity question is this. And by the way, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful advice. I love it.
Thank you.
If you could say one thing as the new Naseem to the old Naseem prior to May 21st, what would you say?
I would say, trust yourself. And I don't think, I applaud that you kind of found that courage early on, but it takes courage to trust yourself and be kind to yourself. We're the harshest critics,
Yeah.
of ourselves. But, let's like, what I've gotten better at now, and I wish I had thought about earlier, is that, we need to also measure our progress against ourselves. Where am I today versus where I was yesterday? And, I think when you do that, you also can start to trust, yeah, you know what? I am making progress. Like, maybe, I'm not, you know, running as fast as, Joe, or, my grades aren't as good as, Bob or Sally or whoever, is in your life that you could and tend to compare yourself to. Just start comparing yourself to yourself, and then you start to trust yourself a little bit more when you can appreciate your own progress.
Mhm. You only get one you, and you're with yourself your entire life.
Yeah.
It's really very worth building that relationship, building that trust because everyone else comes and goes, but you're always with you.
Yeah. And actually, I want to give a little share one more piece of
Yes,
advice
absolutely.
my girlfriend Lisa gave me when we were in high school. It was the summer before college. We were still very, very insecure. We were talking about college and, how do you, reinvent yourself or, you start over when you go to college. And she said to me, she said, if we don't like ourselves, why should anybody else like us? And I thought that is such great advice. If you don't like the person that you are, you know, maybe are you thinking about how you become the person that you will like? And for me, that was a journey, but I became a person that I liked.
And it's still a journey every day. And
Always.
like all journeys, it's not linear. You're going to have great moments and hard moments and everything in between. If somebody wants to read your content, find you on social media, where do they go?
Well, if you want more of my advice, I actually wrote a book called The Unexpected Benefits of Being Run Over. And my last section of the book is what I call the sermon. So those are, 10 things that I learned from the accident and the journey that, I want to remember, because I'm not all of a sudden enlightened and, that I thought could add value to other people. So you can find me on Amazon, buy the book or the Audible. And then if you wanted to reach out to me, I also do coaching. You can find me at lifeunbreakable.com.
Amazing, Naseem. Thank you so much for being here, for so
You.
vulnerably and beautifully and openly sharing your story. I've had a beautiful time.
Me too.
Yes. And thank you so much to all of the listeners for joining us on another episode of the Campus Chronicles podcast. So, if today's episode gave you life, perspective, or just a much needed moment to breathe in a busy world, I don't want you to keep it to yourself. Share it, tag us, please send it to a friend who needs to hear it. And if you're not on our newsletter yet, what are you doing? Go to campuschroniclespod.com and join the crew. We have all the behind the scenes things, unfiltered thoughts from me and the team, bonus resources, and insider only invites to events, giveaways, and things that we really don't post anywhere else. I promise I'm not going to spam you. It's just the good stuff straight to your inbox. Being in university is wild enough. You don't need to miss out on what matters. Sign up now and let's make this next semester the one that you stop surviving and start thriving. Until next time, stay bold, stay curious, keep writing your own chapter. This is Campus Chronicles.